for the story? All right, here we go. We heard last week how God created a world and called it good. It was good. We met Ish and Isha, man and woman, that we know as Adam and Eve. And we were introduced to a Lord that was not just distant and powerful, but came up close and relational and cared for our smallest steps. So when we gathered together, we heard the beginning of the story. We experienced the wonder of creation. And we also found that we were supposed to participate in co-creating with God and continuing that work by caring for this world, by caring for each other, by going out and having kids. And they were going to be in the image of God too. And God granted man and woman something else, freedom. God granted them the freedom to love and care for all that God had made, to enjoy every bit of it, and even free will, so that they could make their own choice. And with a parent's wisdom, God also gave kids wisdom of limits. Parents, if your child is here today, I want you to turn to that child and say, because I love you, I give you limits. Child, I want you to turn to your parent and smile, not grimace. God gave us limits to that. And what was God's limits that we had for the freedom? What was that limits for Adam and Eve? It was to not eat what? That's right, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right? Okay. So as the fires burned low last week, we left Ish and Isha in the garden, enjoying the relationship that God had given them, and relationship with this God who not only creates but is near. And so today, we're going to return to that garden and hear the story and see how it continues.
The serpent was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made. He spoke to the woman. Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, not at all. We can eat from the tree in the garden. It's only about the tree in the middle of the garden, God said. Do not eat from it. Don't even touch it or you'll die. The serpent told the woman, you won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil. When the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realized what she would get out of it, she'd know everything. She took and ate the fruit and then gave some to her husband, and he ate. Immediately, the two of them did see what's really going on, saw themselves naked. They sewed fig leaves together as makeshift clothes for themselves. When they heard the sound of God strolling in the garden in the evening breeze, the man and his wife hid in the trees of the garden. They hid from God. God called to the man, where are you? He said, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid. God said, who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from? The man said, the woman you gave me as a companion, she gave me fruit from the tree, and yes, I ate it. God said to the woman, what is this that you've done? The serpent seduced me, she said, and I ate. God told the serpent, because you've done this, you're cursed. Cursed beyond all cattle and wild animals. Cursed to slink on your belly and eat dirt all your life. I'm declaring war between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He'll wound your head. You'll wound his heel. And he told the woman, I'll multiply your pains in childbirth. You'll give birth to babies in pain. You'll want to please your husband, but he'll lord it over you. And he told the man, because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from, don't eat from this tree, the very ground is cursed because of you. Getting food from the ground will be as painful as having babies is to your wife. You'll be working in pain all your life long. The ground will sprout thorns and weeds. You'll get your food the hard way, planting and tilling and harvesting, sweating in the fields from dawn to dusk, until you return to the ground yourself, dead and buried. You started out as dirt. You'll end up dirt. The man, known as Adam, named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. God made leather clothing for Adam and his wife and dressed them.
Now, I told Paul that this story means that's just proof that women are not supposed to be taking care of the food and preparing it and giving it to the husband. But I don't think that that's quite right. I don't. Because I think this is where Nahash, the serpent, the serpent who was more crafty than all the other creatures, he knew how to get to Isha. And as soon as Isha said, If we just touch the tree, we're going to die. He knew that was wrong because he knew God had not said that. And he knew why she said it, and he knew he had her. He knew that she was going to be doing her drama thing. I don't know why girls did that back then, but anyway, they did way back then. He also knew that he could tap into our deepest anxiety as humans, the desire to be more than. We don't like being less than. We don't like having limits. We kind of like the idea of doing what we want. And we have that haunting suspicion that maybe we can't. We have that terrible feeling that maybe somebody is better or has more than we do. Because the serpent talked as if he knew. And he knew that Isha could hardly resist that. He said, "You won't die. You will be just like God." Wow. And Isha took that delicious looking fruit and she ate and she gave it to her husband and he ate too. And you know what? At that moment, something died. That oneness that they had died because what was the first thing they did? You'd think, you eat something wonderful. I have all this wonderful knowledge. I'm going to feel great. What was the first thing that happened? They felt ashamed. They were one before. They were vulnerable and trusting and love. And the very first thing when they opened their eyes is they realized they weren't one. They were shamed. They hid themselves. They used that wonderful gift of freedom and they tried to grasp for power, making themselves equal to God, and instead they grabbed onto something they didn't want to grab onto. They forgot who was the creator and who was the creature. Too late. And what did these brave ones do immediately following? Did they powerfully say, "You know what? I made a mistake. Sorry about that. But, I am me. I'm woman, hear me roar," or whatever, and I make my own choices. I stand by them and I will take the consequences. Is that what our stalwart ancestors did? What'd they say? Her fault. His fault. Serpent's fault. Oh boy, yeah. They shifted the blame. The very first humans in already broken relationships, when caught in sin, instead of taking responsibility for their own actions, shifting the blame, still trying to look good. Well, I'm bad, but I'm not as bad as they are. Of course, we don't do that today, right? Not a real learning curve over the years, is there? When we look back and we tell this story, are we still destroying our relationships? We still putting ourselves first, over each other, eating the forbidden fruit? Very first sin, and we're still doing it. And we're still trying to shift the blame. How many here have flat out said, if Eve had not eaten that, we would not be in this mess today? Anybody here ever said that? Yeah. Well, guess what? Let's assume that Eve did not eat that, nor did Adam. And the entire world came right up to this generation and this church with these people right here. We would have ruined it for the rest of the world. Is there anybody in here that hasn't sinned? No, this is our story too. And we still try to hide our sin. We still try to hide the shame. And you know what? God continues to seek us out too. God still comes to us and says, "Where are you?" Not to punish us and say, "Where are you? Wait till your," I guess he can't say wait till your father gets home, can he? Okay. Instead, he comes out of a gracious invitation to say, "Let me clothe you again where you're feeling naked and vulnerable. Let me come and hold you and be with you and walk with you because you really don't need to hide from me." And yet when we do something wrong, what's the first thing we do? We hide. God says you don't need to do that. There's also one other part of this story, that statement in there about where God says, if you eat this, you will die. You wonder, so why didn't they drop dead right then? Some people think, well, maybe it's because that was when they started to age. Personally, I think they did start to die as they tasted that fruit because they had lived as one flesh and they were clearly separated from each other and from God, and that had never been there before. Death of a relationship is an awfully hard thing, especially with sin, death of relationship with God. Maybe God gave them grace. Maybe God knew they would be dying that way, and God said, I'm going to make you live in a new way with the natural consequences of your actions. Parents ever said that to your kids? Yeah. But because you have refused to live on my terms in my garden, you can't live in the garden anymore, but I will go with you into your world because I still love you. And God did go with them. Even when we deserve death, God gives us life. Even when the penalty is death for our sins, God gives us life. God continues to make a way. Over and over, as we hear the story, we keep hearing how God made a way. In saying yes to the serpent's temptation, they said no to God. And you know what? They moved out and they had children, Cain and Abel, and they said no to God too. Cain thought that his brother was doing better. Cain thought that God liked his brother best, thought that his brother was above him. And Cain murdered Abel. Like his parents, he chose to value himself higher, and death came into the world. And on that day, I think a piece of all of their hearts died. And the years went on. Instead of turning to God, the children of God kept turning further and further away. As the human community grew, so did the sin. And finally, God looked out over humanity, and instead of saying, it's good, God said, oh, this is terrible. And God was chagrined and heartbroken, and the earth itself grieved. What was God to do? The people's intentions were continually cruel, evil. The earth was corrupted and filled with violence. The whole of creation groaned with the harm that the humans wrought upon it. And God said, I regret I ever created them. And so God undid the work of creation and started over. But he didn't start completely over. There was a man. Do you know the man's name? You've heard the story before. Noah. God was with Noah. God, who wasn't all caught up with the violence of humanity. And he said, Noah, you're feeling pretty alone right now. Pretty out on your own, right? You feel like the world's against you. I want you to know I'm for you, and I will begin with you right here. And so God asked him to build an ark and to take the animals because they were going to begin again. God gave him that work to deliver his family from the waters of chaos. And then the waters that God had separated on the second day of creation were brought together again in decreation. And yet, that's not where it ended. Just because evil had drenched itself already in sin, God was not going to let it stop there. And so God recreated immediately. God again separated the waters and made a covenant shown in a rainbow, never to destroy the earth again. Once more, God met humankind right where they were, as they were, and began a new way to save us from ourselves, to mend the cosmos that had been broken by our sin. And God blessed Noah. God blessed his family and repeated the command given to the first humans, be fruitful and multiply, go out into the earth, cover the earth. So, did they get it? Is that what Noah's family did? No. Instead of going throughout the earth, they came to the plain of Shinar and they stayed there. And they said, hey, we're something. Let's build us a city. And we're going to build us a tower and we're going to reach up into heavens and we will be right up there with God. Okay, individually we can't do it, but as a nation, we are equal to God. And they built that tower and God said, oh dear. And God caused the language to be different. God confused their language. It was one big babble. And that's why we call this the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. God thwarted their plans, and God still called them to himself. And maybe that's a good place to stop for right now. Because we began with the picture of the first humans enjoying the goodness and the harmony of creation, living in a world that was very good. And for now, I think it may be well to end it in a world marked by violence and separation and distrust and fear and alienation and self-interest, because I think that's a world that we're familiar with. I think it looks a lot like the world that's surrounding us right now, and we can relate to that. And with them we wonder, will God forgive us? Is God with us? Where in God's name, literally, do we go from here? In this world, a catastrophe that began when God's creatures decided we're the greatest and we come first. We might want to think about that. But with the scattering of the people begins the next chapter of the story. It's the story of the nations, of many families and many tribes with many languages, and how in the midst of rebellion and rejection and just plain ugliness and evil, God begins a plan to meet the nations where they are and calls one family from all the families of the earth in order to bring God's blessing to them all. We come to Abraham, whose story we're going to hear when we gather again next week. In the words God has given us, Shabbat Shalom, Sabbath, peace, wholeness and rest and fullness be with you until we again gather together and hear the story.